Samuel chapter 30, if you'll turn back with me to 1 Samuel chapter 30. This is it. 1 Samuel chapter 30. What's going on? Just a couple of quick thoughts to get us back into the framework here. David has returned to Ziklag at the command of King Achish of Gath, a Philistine king. Remember, David has decided that he's safer out of the land of Israeli-occupied Israel, the promised land that God had promised them. Remember, the Philistines had come there, a sea people, probably from the island of Crete, who came across in 2000 BC or so, about the time of Abraham. They came and landed on the shores of Israel, and they have a considerable property that they are in control of in Israel along the Gaza Strip and Ashdod and Ashkelon and Gath, these cities. Well, David has decided, because his father-in-law, King Saul's been trying to kill him for 11 years, that he's safer in the land of the Philistines, the ungodly, non-Yahweh worshiping, pagan, idolatrous Philistines. I'm safer there than I am in this house. So he left, and he went into this city, Gath, which is the city where the giant Goliath is from, that he slew 11 years earlier or so. David has returned to this king, to Achish, and has totally manipulated this king, lied to him, manipulated, deceived him into thinking, I'm one of you now. I'm a friendly here, please let me stay. And so David has followed this Philistine king, the king of Gath, Achish, into battle. The Philistines have decided it's time to gain more territory. We're going to go north. We're going to go into the Jezreel Valley. We're going to strip some more land from these Jews. And David's in a pickle. David actually comes up with, in the rear, the flank of the Philistine army is David, a Jew, and 600 Jewish men, seemingly moving to battle against Jews. And so when the other four lords of the Philistines, the other four kings of Ashdod and Gaza and Ashkelon and Ekron, when these kings realize that David's marching with the Philistine army, they turn to Achish and say, this is madness. Send the Jew back. And so David, who's about to become the king of Israel, is commanded by a Philistine king, go back to Ziklag, the city that I gave you, leave the army of the Philistines, and that's what David has done. So David has taken 3 days, according to the scripture, to get back to this Philistine city, Ziklag. So he has returned at the command of King Achish to Philistine territory. He finds, when he gets back to his city, this Philistine city that he's been given charge of for a year and 4 months, he finds that the Amalekites have raided the city. They've taken all the women and the children captive, including David's two wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. Remember Abigail from 1 Samuel 25, the great Abigail. They've been taken captive, and the city's been burned to the ground. So now David has another decision on his hands. David's 600 men, his army, the great army that would become David's mighty 30 men, and all of these people that will fight for King David soon. This 600 men group of Jews that David has amassed want to stone him to death, want to stone their own man David for letting this happen. Because I think what's going on here is these 600 men have witnessed the manipulations of King Achish. They've seen and heard David's lies. They know that David's putting himself more and more in a bad situation. Why aren't we trusting Yahweh, the King of Israel, the God of Israel? Why aren't we back in the promised land, in the territory of Judah? Why aren't we in our own territory? Why do we think Yahweh can't protect us there, but the pagan god of the Philistines can protect us in Philistia? This is your fault, David. Our women, our children are all gone, and this is your fault. And they lay this at the feet of David and pick up stones to kill David. And David turns to the Lord. This is quite fascinating to me, because David's only months away from becoming the king of Israel. And right before he becomes king, his own people mutiny against him and want him dead. Now, let me ask you this question again as we as we try to put 2 or 3 thoughts and studies that we're doing at the same time together, who would love it if King David were to die at the hand of his own men? Who in the universe would relish at the fact that the seed of the woman, the promise of a deliverer who would come through David's seed, 2 Samuel 7, the promise that through David he would have an eternal king, an eternal dominion, an eternal throne? Who would love if his own men picked up stones to kill him and ended the promise of deliverance through David's seed, the deliverance of Adam's human race? The answer is Satan. I'm trying to get at Satan here. Satan comes very, very close at many, many times in the Old Testament, in the Jewish story. Satan comes very close, often, at snuffing out God's promise to deliver mankind through the seed of the woman. He's got 600 men ready to stone David before David has given birth to Bathsheba's son, Solomon. The kingdom ends with David. Solomon doesn't come if Bathsheba's interactions don't occur. They have not occurred yet. Everything stops with David and his mistake if his 600 men stone him to death. What does David do? The opposite of what Saul did when Saul was in similar pickles. When Saul got to the pickle, Saul, remember, turned to the pagan demonist, the spiritist, the witch of Endor, for guidance. But David turns to Yahweh. Remember, Saul turned to Yahweh, but Yahweh would not answer him. David turns to Yahweh for guidance and deliverance, and we see in this relationship that God will indeed answer King David. So, in verse 8, pick up with me in verse 8, we charge to the end of the chapter. David inquired of the Lord, I've got a problem. It's a problem that I made. I have been deceptive. I have led the king of Achish into thinking I'm someone that I wasn't. And I've got a problem now because I've come back. I left my post thinking I could continue the ruse, follow the Philistine army. We don't know what he intended to do when he got into the Jezreel Valley as he's picking up arms with the Philistines against the Jews. But I'm sure David had some sort of idea in his mind. God gave him grace through the other 4 kings in sending him home. But David's got a problem now because all his people are gone, and it's David's fault. So David turns to Yahweh for guidance and deliverance. David inquired of the Lord Yahweh, and he said, shall I pursue this band? This band of Amalekites that took all our families. Should I pursue this band? Shall I overtake them? Are you going to give me success in this? What do I do? What's the other option? Or let these 600 men stone me until I'm dead. What do I do? And the Lord, it says, said to David. Now remember, in the previous chapter, when Saul turned to the Lord did not answer. I'll show you the verse in just a minute. He didn't answer Saul. Their relationship was severed. It was broken. But not David. Not David's relationship. So the Lord answers David as he's asking him, what do I do in this battle? God says, pursue. You go after them, David, a command. Pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and you will surely rescue all. Everything that's been taken from you from Ziklag, everything will be returned to your hand. Now that's a promise of God. And David understands the promise of God. But again, what a great contrast. Look at how God had answered David's father-in-law, King Saul, I'll say moments earlier, because it was within a couple of weeks. This is all a very short story. In 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 6, it says, when Saul, the king of Israel, when he inquired of Yahweh, the same way David is, the Lord did not answer him either by dreams or by Urim. Remember, the high priest's ephod had been taken because this fool Saul had killed all the priests at Nov, driven the priesthood out of the land of Canaan so that it went with David. So the Lord didn't answer him either by his own dreams. This is the way that the Lord spoke to people in those days, the Jewish age, dreams, visions, personal interactions, the angel of the Lord, etc., or by the Urim and the Thummim that the high priest had in his ephod, or by the prophets. Samuel was dead. So God didn't answer Saul, but here we have David asking a question, and the Lord answers him instantly. I'll ask you this question before we move forward. Whose relationship do you want? I mean, make no mistake, as you go through the Scriptures, you have these contrasts over and over and always, almost on every page of the book. You want to live like Saul? You want to live like David? You choose. Deuteronomy chapter 30, Moses tells the Israelites, I place before you death and life, blessing and cursing. Choose life, that you may live. It's your choice. Blessing and cursing. Deuteronomy chapter 28, for 14 verses. If you obey the commandments, the ordinance, the statutes, the laws of the Lord, everything in Israel will be blessed, all of it. No diseases, no war, all peace. Your women will all be pregnant. There will be no problems in pregnancy. Your kneading bowls will be full. Your flocks will be beyond count. The trees will blossom. The crops will grow. No pestilence, no famine, no locust, none of that if you obey me. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 15. But if you choose not to, cursing. And here we have Saul, who has chosen not to follow Yahweh, being cursed. And we have David, the opposite, choosing life. I'm not perfect. David's not perfect. He's made a bonehead group of decisions here in this year and 4 months and is continuing to lie to this king Achish. He's made a series of terrible mistakes, terrible judgment calls. And it's costing him, could cost him his life at the hands of his own men now. Except Yahweh steps into the picture because David's humble enough to go to the Lord and say, I've made a mess of this, Lord. I've made a mess of this. Are you going to give our people back so that I can have my life? And the Lord answers David and says, yes, pursue them. I'll give you everything they took and more. Imagine the relief when David heard from his God. So which relationship do you want? Both are available to you. Verse 9, so David went. Of course he did. The Lord said, go. David went. He and his 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those left behind remained. Now there's something interesting that's about to happen here. Watch this. David will split his army. But David pursued, he and 400 men. Now he's got 600 total men. 400 men go with David into battle, continue the pursuing of the Amalekites. But look what happens. For 200 were too exhausted to cross the brook, and they remained behind at this brook Besor. So last time we were talking about, and we started picking out these leadership qualities. Remember, God in 11 years has been training David. He's been growing David up so David would be ready. Turned him from that 19-year-old to this 30-year-old man ready to take the leadership of Israel, ready to lead Israel into battle, out of battle, successes, miseries. David would lead Israel. And God's taken 11 years to build David into the man he is. And we've been going through, as we talk about this chapter, we've been going through some leadership character qualities that David possesses here. A good leader knows not to push his men beyond what they can handle. And David knows, I've got 400 men that are capable of following me into battle, and I've got 200 that are not. A fool would say, you're in my employ, you are my army, man up, and let's go. But not David, because he's sensible, he's decisive, he understands that hard decisions come in leadership roles, and he makes an on-the-spot decision. 400 will go, and you 200 that are too tired, stay here with the bags. It's okay. The Lord can deliver. I could take 5 people, and the Lord would deliver. Because the Lord said, you pursue, and everything they took I'll give back. David could have gone alone. He's got the promise of God. But he's decisive. A leadership quality is decisive. He makes a decision. Oh, what should I do? He doesn't pine over it. He sees the facts, makes a decision, continues with the command of God, pursue the Amalekites. Takes 400, leaves 200, keeps moving at the command of God. Leadership quality, decisiveness. We keep going in verse 11. Now they found an Egyptian in the field. Keep looking for how David interacts with people, enemies, Jews, Gentiles. Watch this leader of a man who's about to be the great one, the apple after God's own eye. Watch how David interacts with people. Leadership qualities pouring out of this man. Not perfect, bonehead decisions, got him into this mess, but a great thinker, a great leader of men. They found an Egyptian in the field, and they brought him to David. And they gave him bread, and he ate. They provided him water to drink. They gave him a piece of fig cake. Now we're talking about dessert. They gave him a fig cake. They gave him 2 clusters of raisins, and he ate. Then his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. What leadership quality do we see here? Kindness. Kindness. The kindness of David. Doesn't even know this man. Knows for this man to be in this area at this time, if he's not a Jew, this is an enemy of mine. But what does he do? He shows kindness to this man. In verse 13, David said to him, he's an Egyptian, he's not an Amalekite, but what's he doing here? David said to him, to whom do you belong? Where are you from? And so the boy answered, he said, I am a young man of Egypt, a servant of an Amalekite. So he's an indentured slave. He's a bought slave of an Amalekite man. He says, my master left me behind when I became ill 3 days ago, when he fell sick. So here you have the Amalekite with no kindness. If you're too sick to carry on, I'm just going to leave you here. I'm not going to leave you provisions. I'm not going to leave you food. Not going to leave you water. You can die. That's fine with me. David finds this same man and fortifies him, gives him food, gives him water, gives him drink, gives him rest, earns his appreciation and respect, the way leaders do. So he's an enemy. He's a servant of an Amalekite who had just burned David's city, taken David's wives, taken David's children, and all the wives and children of David's 600 men. He continues, this Egyptian man, he says, we made a raid on the Negev. Now this is Jewish-held territory. This is the southern Judean valley. This is the desert of the Negev of the Kerethites, and on which belongs to Judah, more Israeli-held land, and on the Negev of Caleb. So they were around Hebron when they did this. And we also, not only did we do all these things to the Jewish territories, but we also burned the Philistine city of Ziklag with fire. Yes, I am one of the people that was in your city. What's David going to do? So the Egyptian, he just finds out, was fighting with the Amalekites against David's people. He's guilty of this wrong. There's no doubt about it. None of this is good news for the Egyptian. I mean, he's not making friends here with David by telling him what he's done. But yet he tells David what he's done. The good thing about the Egyptian is he knows where the people are. Verse 15. David has gained this man's cooperation. He's treated him kindly. He's fed him. He's met his physical human needs. He's gained the man's appreciation. He's gained the man's cooperation. And so look at verse 15. David says to him, will you bring me down to this band? You say you're part of them. You must know where they have gone, what trek they went, what direction they left from here. Will you take me to them? And the Egyptian tells David, swear to me by God that you will not kill me. He has 2 stipulations. Number 1, don't kill me. And number 2, or deliver me into the hands of my master, because if I go back to my master, he'll kill me for certain for letting this information out. So if you promise me, David, by your God, not an Egyptian God, not a Canaanite God, not a Philistine God, but by your God, if you will promise me by your God that you will not kill me or return me to my master, he says, I'll bring you down to this band. He completely cooperates with David. I think probably because of the way David treated him as a not a friendly, but as a man who had needs. Very kind. When he had brought him down, so the Egyptian does exactly what he says he'll do. When he had brought him down to the band, behold, they were spread all over the land. And look at what they were doing, these Amalekites, all happy and fat and drunk because they had just defeated the Jewish God, Yahweh, or so they thought. Remember these early Canaanite battles were all my God versus your God. I've shown you places before later in the Scripture where the gods in the mountains say the only reason the Jews beat us in the mountains is because their God is a God of the mountains. But if we get their God down into the valley, we've got him. Because our God is a God of the valley, and Yahweh is not a God of the valley. And what would Yahweh do but show up and destroy the whole army, the whole enemy army there? It's happened again. So they're eating and they're drinking and they're dancing, which were actions which were associated with pagan worship. This is the way these people worshipped, with eating and drinking and dancing and prostitution and fornication and all of this kind of thing. It's who they were. We could go into different parts of the Bible and show you that. We've seen it before. This is a part of worship, thanking their God for the victory over the weaker Jewish God. Not good. It never works out when people do this. But this is what's happening to the Amalekites. They're spread all over the land. They're eating, they're drinking, they're dancing because of the great spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah, the Negev desert. So they've got all this stolen stuff, this spoils, this booty, and they decide to stop and celebrate. Interesting that they had all this food, but yet the Egyptian man had nothing. It's not like they didn't have provisions to give the Egyptian. They just abandoned him to die in the wilderness when they left. That's not how David treats people. The law doesn't allow that. The law, the Mosaic law, has much to say about how you're to treat a stranger and a foreigner, because you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. David knows it. Verse 17, what does David do to the Amalekites when he finds them there eating and drinking and dancing and playing, not ready for war, thinking they're impenetrable and unstoppable? Verse 17 says, David slaughtered them from twilight until the evening of the next day. He killed everything that breathed except for 400 men. It says, not a man of them escaped except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. Everybody who was on feet, they went into hand-to-hand combat with David and his 400 men, and they slaughtered them. What did God say? What was the promise? Here it is. David asked of the Lord, shall I pursue? And what did God say? Pursue, for you shall overtake them and will surely rescue all. God makes a promise, God keeps a promise. We see it over and over and over and over and over and over and over in the Scriptures. Yet another promise that God has kept. Verse 18, David has slaughtered the Amalekites except for 400. Verse 18, remember, look at what it says on the board here. You will surely rescue all. What do we expect for David to have in his possession after he slaughters the Amalekite? All. Everything they took. And what does the Bible? That's what God promised him. If even one woman or one child is missing, then God's not a promise keeper. The Scripture's not a trustworthy document. Close it up. Let's leave. Simple as that. But it says in verse 18, so David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, just as God had promised him. He rescued his 2 wives, but nothing of theirs was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that they had taken from themselves. David brought it all back. That's because God had promised David, you're going to bring it all back. He kept his promise to David. So let me ask you the question before we get going again. Who allowed this? Who brought all the stuff back? Who did it? Did Yahweh bring all the stuff back into David's possession? Or did David bring all the stuff back into David's possession? What's the answer to the question? Who did it? Huh? God allowed it. But answer the question more specifically. Who did it? Who's in charge of all the people, all the spoils, all the things that the Amalekites took? Whose responsibility was it to get it back, and who gets the credit for having given it back? Does David get the credit, or does Yahweh get the credit? What's the answer to the question? It's kind of a trick question. Don't be afraid of it. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. This is a perfect example of what we call active dependence. David is absolutely dependent with the smaller band, 400 men going against an army we don't know the size of in the Amalekites, but it was more than 400. How do I know that for certain? How do I know that? I know that David had 400 men, and I know the Amalekite army that David defeated was much larger than 400 men. How do I know that from the Bible? How do I know that? Because it just said that David slaughtered everybody except for 400 men who got away on camels. That was the size of David's army. There must have been thousands in this valley that David slaughtered. Thousands. Who's responsible for such a slaughtering if not Yahweh himself? God said, I will give you the victory. But you got to go out and swing your sword. You have to actively depend on my deliverance and my provision of a victory. You have to do your part here. And so David actively acted as a military leader, led a band of military soldiers into a battle that he couldn't win, knowing, I will win this, just as surely as I beat Goliath with one of those 5 stones out of that sling. Just as surely as God promised me that, God will give me this victory too, and he did it. So who's responsible for the victory? Well, Yahweh is, because he promised it. But David is also responsible, because if David wouldn't have pursued, they wouldn't have won the battle. Active dependence. David's absolutely dependent on the promise of God, and God is depending on David to do his part of the work. Actively depend on one another in this situation. They are both responsible. Verse 20, so David had captured all the sheep and the cattle. Look what he brought back, which the people drove ahead of the other livestock. And they said, this is David's spoil. So the people had a certain section of animals and livestock and sheep that they drove forward ahead of all the others to give to their leader David. What a change of events. What did these men want to do just a couple of days earlier? Stone him to death. And now all of a sudden, who is he again? Because a good leader makes decisions when it's hard to make decisions. David has gone to Yahweh first, not to the witch of Endor, not to demonism, not to spiritism, not to Satan. He goes to Yahweh only every time he's in a pickle. It's the greatness of David. He never turned away from God. Made bonehead decision after bonehead decision. We could name a bunch of them. But who did he turn to? He always bowed his knee to God in humility and confessed, I've sinned against thee and only thee. Said it all the time. And that's what he's done here. Brought it all back. And he's gone from being one that his own men wanted to kill to being one that his own people wanted to honor with the chiefest, the greatest, the best of the spoils. This is for David. They turned in their stones for honor and spoil. Amazing life of David. When David came to the 200 men, what about the guys that didn't fight? Do they deserve anything? What's the answer? What is your thought? Without reading what happens, if you haven't read it yet, the 400 men, they went into battle. They risked their lives. They put their neck on their line for their king, their leader, and for their wives and for their children, for the reunion of their families. But what about the 200 men that stayed at the river Besor? Do they deserve anything? Look at what the scripture says. The leadership of David. David captured, verse 21, when David came to the 200 men who were too exhausted to follow David, who had also been left at the brook Besor, and they went out to meet David. I mean, David's got choices here. How am I going to respond to these physically weaker men than the other 400 when they come out to cheer me and to gather me back into the midst. They went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him, not only the 400 men, not only all the wives and children, but their own wives and children, who their 400 fellow soldiers went in and captured and freed from the hands of the Amalekites. You have 200 men going to visit, going to be reunited with their families that they did not free. I wonder if there's going to be any animosity in the ranks here. They went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with David, and David approached the people and greeted them. What a man this David is. Personable, approachable, agreeable, not standoffish as he could be as a king. I mean, how many kings do you see in movies and in different things that you can only approach if they allow you to, and when you do, you must come humbly. You can't look them in the eye. All you can do is grovel up to them and kiss their ring, but not this David. Not this David. That wasn't his personality. It wasn't his character. He was an approachable leader of men. Wonderful man, King David. He's generous. We're going to see his generosity here. We're going to see his generosity in the next 10 verses. Look what it says. There's a difference of opinion that immediately surfaces when the 400 soldiers come back and the 200 other weakened soldiers by exhaustion meet each other. There's an immediate difference of opinion, and David has to solve it. Again, decisiveness on David's part. Verse 22 says, "Then all the wicked and worthless men," which is how these men are described from the first time they leave with David when he leaves to go to Ziklag. "All the wicked and worthless men among those who went with David said this, because they did not go with us, this 200 men, we will not give them any of the spoil." Oh, is that so? They have made their own decree. We risked our lives. We saved your wives. It's enough that we give you your wives and your children back. You can say thank you and we'll leave it at that. We're not giving you anything else. That was their opinion. The men, "Because you did not go with us, we'll not give you any of the spoil that we've recovered, except to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. We'll give you your people. That's all you deserve, you weakling." And David settles the argument in verse 23. Unpopular. You're going to make one people mad. There's no doubt about it. This decision will make one of these parties, either the 400 or the 200, mad at him. He's not settling this thing peacefully so that everybody coexists and compromises. David makes a decision, a hard decision, that's going to infuriate some men. But sometimes a leader has to make those decisions. Certainly the leader of a nation. Welcome to 2025, yes? You get it? David has to make a decision. How am I going to settle this? David says, "You must not do this, my brothers." He's not yelling and screaming at anybody. He's kind and not argumentative. He's calling them brothers, equals. But he lays down a law here that would stand for all the kingdom age of Israel, for the age in which Israel was a kingdom. This law would stand. David says, "You must not do that, my brothers, with what Yahweh has given us." This is a gift from God, not from us. You 400 men think you're self-made men that you won this battle. You didn't win anything. Yahweh won this battle. He allowed you, He used you to win it. But without Yahweh's deliverance, we don't win this battle. He's given us all these things. That's the mind of David. With what the Lord has given us, who has kept us and delivered into the hand the band that came against us. You can't do with all this spoil what you want to do. Listen for the crash. Well, he made it. David says, "You didn't earn this. This is a gift from God. Your perspective, your viewpoint is entirely wrong, men." Steadfast, David, he has integrity. One of the other leadership qualities of David here, integrity. A quick definition of integrity. We hear the word all the time, maybe don't know exactly what it means. Steadfast adherence to a strict moral or ethical code. Steadfast adherence. I won't sway from this code. Steadfast adherence to a strict moral or ethical code. That's King David. He's a man, a leader of integrity. And David's viewpoint here was that these spoils weren't won in battle, they were given by the Lord. You think you won them in battle. You think you won them and you earned them, and because the 200 didn't go with you, they didn't win them and they didn't earn them. I'm here to tell you that this is all a gift from God. Your viewpoint is completely skewed here. You're wrong. These are mighty men of war David's talking to. Imagine how they could have responded to David. A few days ago they wanted to kill him. Now he riles them up again. Gifts from God for all Jewish people, for all the Jewish men, not just for the 400. Gifts from God is what these things are. Yahweh has protected us. He has delivered us in battle. He safely delivered back to us the captives, our wives and our children, the Jews, the Jewish women, the Jewish children. You should be thankful to God. We should be worshiping God instead of deciding who earned the spoils and who didn't. And that's what's happening. I tell you what, one of the grossest things to me is that for some people, every single thing in life is a competition. A competition. Some people, everything is a competition. And these 400 men had that character flaw. They were better than those 200 that didn't go. And if you want to compete, we win and they lose. We're the winners and they're the losers. We earned, they lost. Period. Horrible, horrible viewpoint. Horrible. Life is not a competition. You want to compete with somebody, compete with the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Don't compete with mine. You can beat me. I'll let you win if it makes you feel better. It won't get you anywhere with God to be better than Rick King, I assure you. Life is not a competition that we're always competing against each other. It's just gross. It's a faulty viewpoint that leads to this horizontal fixation that I've got to be better than him or better than her or faster than him or every good gift and every perfect gift comes from where? From above, from the Father of lights. It's God that determines all these things. Let God determine these things. We are unified. We are to be one. We are to be like-minded. We're to be equals. We have different spiritual gifts in the church. That's not a competition. I would never tell any of you, oh, you can't do that because I'm the pastor and you just have the gift of this. Blasphemy. Goodness gracious. Here you have a dispute in Israel. 400 men who think they're more worthy than their 200 brothers in arms. And you have a decisive, heroic, courageous leader in David saying, you're wrong about this, man. This is wrong. God gave us this gift. Verse 24, who will listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down to the battle, here's David's edict as their leader. As his share is for him who goes down to the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. He's fair. He's a man of integrity and he's fair. He's got a viewpoint that God loves. Don't forget this when you read about David. This is the man after God's own heart, the apple of God's eye, who's a wonderful thinker, great man, fool from time to time, just like we all are. But a wonderful leader of men. David makes Israeli policy here. He makes Jewish policy here that would stand throughout the kingdom era in Israel. When we go into battle, I don't care whether I take Midian's 300, if you look backwards, or all 10,000. Everybody shares in the spoil because the spoil comes from God. The victory is the Lord's. David didn't gloat when he killed Goliath. David understood, yeah, I killed him with my sling, with my stone, but this victory belongs to God only. God gave this victory. David's got such a focus on where things come from. He's right. And he makes Jewish policies stand throughout the kingdom era in Israel. David's thinking God's thoughts after him. Every man in the armed forces, whether he fights or whether he's the guy that provides the meals for the fighters or whether he's the guy that washes the dishes, everybody's equal on the playing field in the Jewish eye, and everybody will achieve and gain the glory of the victory, and everybody will share in the spoils. Jewish law. Look what it says in the Scriptures. In the Jewish law, one of the 613 commands that God gave to Moses for Israel to live by was this. The Lord spoke to Moses. Who's speaking? Yahweh is, the Creator. And this is what He says to Moses. He said, you and Eleazar the priest and the heads of the fathers' households of the congregation take account of the booty that was captured, both of man and of animal. Of all the servants that we've captured from the defeated enemy, of all the animals, the sheep, the camels, everything that we've captured, add it all up. I want to know the numbers. When you have the numbers, he said, divide the booty between the warriors who went out to battle and all the congregation. So not only in the Jewish law were the warriors supposed to separate the battle, they were also to separate the spoils and the booty with all the Jewish people, with all the members of the congregation. Does David know the law? Does David know the Mosaic law? Does the king of Israel know the Mosaic law? He's about, in the next week or two, David would become king, at least over Hebron and part of Israel. Of course he knows the law. Look what it says in verse 25. So it has been from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel to this day. The booty goes to everyone. It comes from God. It's to be showered on everyone. So how does David work this booty? He's a diplomatic genius. Look what it says in verse 26. Knowing, now don't misunderstand, listen to the big picture here. 11 years has gone by. David knows that God has left Saul. He's not answering Saul. David knows that he's about to attain the kingship, the rulership in Israel. David knows the days have to be clocking along and getting close. And he knows that the men of Judah will have to lead all the rest of Israel. David's a Judahite from the tribe of Judah. He knows that the men of Judah will have to lift him up as their king for the rest of Israel to follow. Who will be the king once Saul dies? Diplomatic genius. Look what he does. Verse 26. Now when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah. What does God say? The congregation at large shall share in the booty. What does David do? He sends the congregation at large some of the booty. He's obeying the Mosaic law. He sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah, to his friends, and he said this, behold, a gift to you, a gift for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. God conquered his enemies. He gave us the spoils, not only what the Amalekites took from us, but what they had already. God gave it all to us. And I'm giving some to you. Because God told us through Moses in the Mosaic law that we were to do this. This isn't for the men of battle, it's for all of Israel. Exactly what he did. So not only did he recover what the Amalekites stole, he recovered what the Amalekites already had. And not only does he divide it between not only just the 400, but all 600 of his soldiers, even those that stayed behind, but he completely divides it to all the congregation of Israel, starting with the men in Judah. The men whose support he would need very, very soon. Yes, he's following the Mosaic law, but it's also a stroke of diplomatic genius to do this because he would need them to raise him up as king soon. Verse 27 to the end just gives names of places. To those who are in Bethel, How spread out did David's booty go, the spoil, all this Amalekite stuff? Where did he send it to? And God's very clear, to Bethel, to Ramoth, to the Negev, to those who were in Yatir, to those who were in Aroer, to Sifmoth, and to those who were in Estomea. All over the land, David sent gifts, not only to the warriors of the battle, but to all the congregation. He's following and obeying God's law, the Mosaic law. To those who were in Rakal, to those who were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, to those who were in the cities of the Kenites, to those who were in Hormah, to those who were in Bor Ashan, and to those who were in Atak. All over the place, David sent out spoil in keeping with the Mosaic law. The booty goes to everyone, and that's exactly what David did. And to those who were in Hebron, now this is the city of Caleb, and to all the places where David himself and his men were accustomed to go. I read that. David's been running from his father-in-law, King Saul, who's wanted to kill him for 11 years. And David has sent gifts not only to all these cities, but it says to all the places where David himself and his 600 men were accustomed to go. You know what this was? This was a thank you card. This was a thank you card from David to all these people. Not only was it in keeping with the law, but it was also in gratitude for not ratting him out and him and his men when they would run from King Saul for their lives and hide in their caves and hide in their fields. It's a thank you card with a precious gift from God attached to it. All the places where he was accustomed to go with his men and find safety over a decade-long period of time. He sends a thank you card to these people. David, a man after God's own heart. The more you read the Old Testament, the more you peel back who David was, the more it's so clearly understandable why God held David in such high regard. Not a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination. But every time David made a stupid decision, David would go immediately to the Lord only, and say, Father, I have messed this up again. It's all me. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the greatness of your compassion. Blot out my transgressions. Does David know he's a sinner? Does David know he relies on the mercy, the grace, and the forgiveness of God? Psalm 51, according to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sins. For I know my transgression and my sin is ever before me. Cleanse me from my sin. Did they confess their sins in the Old Testament? Sure sounds like it. Against you, you only, I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you speak and blameless when you judge me. This is David's confession of sin after his events with Bathsheba. In Psalm 38, David says, O Lord, rebuke me not in your wrath. God's after him because he knows he's sinned. David pleads with the Lord, chasten me not in your burning anger, for your arrows have sunk deep into me. There's a consequence to sins, even the great king's sins, David. Your arrows have sunk deep into me, and your hand has pressed down on me. There is no soundness in my flesh because of your indignation. There is no health in my bones because of my sin. David knows who he is. And when David sins, he goes to God for forgiveness of sins. He goes to God to restore the relationship with Yahweh. And Yahweh says, welcome back, son. Great relationship. For my iniquities are gone over my head as a heavy burden. They weigh too much for me. My wounds grow foul and fester because of my folly. What did David just call himself? A fool. My wounds grow foul and fester because of my decisions, my choices, my foolishness, my folly. I'm coming to you, Father, for forgiveness of sins. I am bent over and greatly bowed down. I go mourning all day long, for my loins are filled with burning, and there is no soundness in my flesh. Can your sin lead to physical ailment? Yes or no? Yes, it can. Does it always? If you are sick, does that mean you're a sinner that's being castigated by God? Yes or no? No. My loins are filled with burning, and there's no soundness in my flesh. I am benumbed and badly crushed. I groan because of the agitation of my heart. Lord, all my desire is before you, and my sighing is not hidden from you. My heart throbs, my strength fails me, and the light of my eyes, even that has gone from me. My loved ones and my friends stand aloof from my plague. Sounds like Job, doesn't it? And my kinsmen stand afar off. Those who seek my life lay snares for me, and those who seek to injure me have threatened destruction, and they devise treachery all day long. But I, like a deaf man, do not hear. I'm like a mute man who does not open his mouth. Yes, I am like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth are no arguments. For I hope in you, O Yahweh. I hope in you that you will answer me, O Lord my God. Where does David go when he's in trouble? When people are seeking his life, when people seek to injure him, when his own family stands afar off from him and won't support him, when people devise treachery against him, where does he go? My hope is in you, O Yahweh, O Lord. You will answer, O Lord my God. For I said, may they not rejoice over me, who when my foot slips would magnify themselves against me. For I am ready to fall, and my sorrow is continually before me. For I confess my sin, and I am full of anxiety because of my sin. But my enemies are vigorous and strong, and many of those who hate me are wrong. They hate me wrongfully, and those who repay evil for good, they oppose me because I follow what is good. Do not forsake me, O Lord, O my God. Do not be far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. Always went to the Lord. David always went to the Lord when he faced a problem too big for him, and he faced them all the time because he got himself into these pickles. He always went back to the Lord. A man after God's own heart. Not a sinless, perfect man after God's own heart. A sinner who knew God's ways and would also always go back to the Lord. A man after God's own heart. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you